All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the third screencast for Chapter 3. Chapter 3 is introducing the supply and demand model to us, and we've been talking about demand. In this screencast, we're going to talk about the things that shift demand curves. All right. So the first thing to make clear is when we're talking about movement along a demand curve and when we're talking about a shift in a demand curve. All right. So for a demand curve, we had something that looked like this, all right? And of course, we had price, and then we had quantity, okay? So at a given price, say $5, right? You could go over and you could see what quantity was demanded. So let's call this QD star. All right, and this is P star. So at a price of $5, we could see what the quantity demanded is. All right, so maybe this goes from 0 to 8, and this is here at 4. Maybe quantity demanded equals 4 here. All right, that's a D for demand. All right, so when price changes, so if price goes up to say $6, right, then the quantity demanded changed. All right, it might fall to say 2 of this good. All right, so that's what we mean by moving along the demand curve. When price changes, you move up and down that demand curve. All right, so that's where we get that inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. All right, you move up and down the demand curve. The curve itself doesn't move. The schedule, the demand schedule, doesn't move. The things that we're going to talk about in this screencast are things that shift demand, that actually cause that demand curve to actually move. All right, so again, here is that basic demand curve, price and quantity, price on the y-axis, quantity on the x. We're talking about things that might make the demand curve move like this, or might make the new demand curve a complete shift in like this. And you'll be thankful that there will be computer-generated versions of those graphs in just a minute. But what shifts demand? What are the things that cause shifts in demand? All right, that's what we're going to be talking about in this screencast. All right. So these are the things that do that are non-price factors. So price goes, you move up and down the demand curve. Almost everything else. All these non-price factors are the things that cause shifts in the demand curve. All right, the entire demand curve will shift to the left or to the right. All right, according to these other factors. All right, so again, this is going to be a little better than what I did before. So here's a demand curve for cantaloupes. All right, and here this is what we mean by movements up and down the demand curve. So things that cause you to move up and down the demand curve are, well, we haven't gotten to supply yet, but if the supply were to change, then you might move up and down this demand curve. That is a change in the quantity demanded. If price changes, the quantity demanded changes. All right, that's what we're talking about by movements along the demand curve. All right, so what causes, though, a decrease in demand? All right, well, that's a shift to the left. So when we say demand decreases, what we mean is this entire curve shifts. So at all prices, people now demand less. So maybe there was some sort of health warning that causes buyers to demand fewer cantaloupes. Cantaloupes are infected with salmonella or something. So that means at all prices, including the price here of $5, people demand less cantaloupes. All right. An increase in demand is when there's a shift to the right of the demand curve. So at all prices, including the price of 5, but even at 6 or 7 or 8 or 9, at all those prices, the quantity demanded is higher than it was before. So maybe there's a medical study that reports that eating cantaloupe lowers cholesterol, and this causes a surge in demand for cantaloupes. All right. So again, the thing I'm emphasizing here is when price changes, you move up and down the demand curve. That is a change in quantity demanded only. When one of these other factors changes, something else, such as the health warning, at all prices, people demand less. Here, going the other way, we've had a medical study saying that that cantaloupe reduces cholesterol. Again, at all prices, that's a shift in demand overall. Okay. So here's a little. I'm going to go through a bunch of different cases again to summarize what we mean by a movement versus a shift. All right. So here we have an example of a change in price. The price fell from $12 to $10, and that means that the quantity demand increased from 7 to 8. All right, that is a movement along the demand curve. That is a change in quantity demanded. That is an increase in quantity demanded. Okay. Okay, now this graph illustrates a decrease in the quantity demanded. So here the price increased from $30 to $50, and following the law of demand, that means that the quantity demanded at 30 was 6, the quantity demanded at 50 is 4, for a decrease in the quantity demanded. All right, so that's again a movement along the demand curve. All right, along the demand curve, price changed, so only quantity demanded changed. All right. So this is an increase in demand caused by non-price factors. The entire demand curve shifts to the right. So people are willing to buy more at every price. All right. So again, at a price here of P star, they were willing to buy this much. But now at a price of P star, they're willing to buy more. Demand has increased at all prices. Here is a decrease in demand caused by non-price factors. The entire demand curve shifts. The entire demand schedule shifts. People are willing to buy less at any given price. So again, here's some price P star. And before, people were willing, the quantity demanded was here. But now at P star, the quantity demanded is here. And that's true for every single price I could pick. At all prices, the quantity demanded is less. So that's a shift. All right. So what are the things that shift demand? What are the things that cause these shifts to happen? All right. Well, the first is a change in income. All right. So we're going to have two different types of goods. And changes in income affect those goods in different ways. So for something we call a normal good, an increase in income causes you to buy more. So for a normal good, as income goes up, all right, that causes the demand curve to shift to the right, all right? That's a normal good, all right? Next, so there's a direct relationship between income and demand, all right? For an inferior good, all right, when your income goes up, demand actually is less, all right? There's an inverse relationship between income and demand for an inferior good, all right? So what are some examples of normal goods? Well, most things are normal goods. That's why we call them normal goods. Steak, housing, laptops, TVs, sit-down restaurants, name brand clothing. So for all of these things, as your income goes up, you usually demand more of these things. What are inferior goods? Usually things like canned meat, Spam, ramen noodles are a classic example, mac and cheese, store brand goods, generic goods, and secondhand clothing. Usually for most people, as their income goes up, they actually demand less of these things. All right, so income shifts demand, but it does so in different ways depending on the type of good. Okay. The next demand shifter we're going to talk about is the price of related goods. Okay. So one type of good that can be related to a good is a complement. All right. These two goods are used together. So I always think of right and left shoes as being perfect complements for one another. In fact, they're so perfect that we almost never buy them separate from one another. All right. These two things are always used together, but it's a good mental device to think of right and left shoes. There's an inverse relationship between the price of good X and the demand for good Y. So think about it this way. If the price of right shoes went up, so the price of right shoes went up, what would that do to demand for left shoes? Well, you also have to buy a right shoe if you buy a left shoe. So demand for left shoes would go down, all right? So if the price of a complement goes up, something you have to buy with it, or it's no good to you, goes up, then demand will shift down for the complementary good, all right? If you're someone who has to have milk in your coffee, right? If price of milk goes up, then your demand for coffee will go down because you have to now pay more for that bundle of the cream and coffee together, okay? For substitutes, so these are things for which they are, one is you can replace the other with one. I always think of Aquafina and Dasani. They're both bottled waters. They're both pretty much the same thing. They're municipal water that has been purified. So those are what are called perfect substitutes. So those are goods that are interchangeable for one another, all right? So with substitutes, there's a direct relationship between the price of good X and the demand for good Y. If the price of, say, Dasani water goes up, then your demand for Aquafina, what do you think will happen for your demand for Aquafina? It's going to go up, right? Because this other substitute is getting more expensive. Fine, you'll just buy the other one, all right? So there's a direct relationship between the two, okay? So what are some examples of complements? Biscuits and gravy, milk and cereal, printers and toner, peanut butter and jelly, whiskey and Coke maybe, or red vines and Mr. Pibb. Someone here thinks they're crazy delicious, all right? So what are substitutes? Well, Coke and Pepsi are substitutes. Snickers and Milky Way, butter and margarine. Now, for some of you are thinking, wait a minute, some of these aren't substitutes for me. But again, we're just saying in general for the whole market for candy bars, people might consider these substitutes, all right? Pizza Hut and Domino's. Various items in the store with multiple brands like frozen pizzas. So if the price of DiGiorno goes up, maybe you start buying more of this little cardboard pizza here. For others of you, those may not be substitutes, and so you wouldn't respond as quickly. We're going to talk about how quickly you respond to changes in price later on. We have a term for that, but for now, we're just trying to get the basics all laid out, okay? So we talked about income shifting demand. We talked about the price of related goods shifting demand. Another thing that will shift demand is changes in people's taste and preferences. So if a good suddenly becomes more fashionable or comes into season, then the demand will shift to the right for that. If suddenly it falls out of fashion, then demand will shift to the left. So new style becomes popular, demand increases, that is, it shifts to the right. All right, so here's the original demand curve. If it suddenly becomes more popular, demand will shift out to the right. Again, price and quantity on the axis, demand is shifting to the right, okay? So a good goes out of style or out of season, then demand decreases or shifts to the left. So think about a lower demand for frozen pizza in the summer, right? People don't usually want to eat a lot of frozen pizza in the summer, all right? Or maybe you get new information about a good, so that could change taste for better or worse. The example of cantaloupes that we used earlier, when a report came out that it was bad for you, demand shifted to the left. When a report came out that it was good for you, demand shifted to the right, all right? So another demand shifter is future expectations. So your expectations about the future. Our consumption today may depend on what we think the price may be tomorrow. Another thing that can shift demand is the number of buyers, all right? So the market demand curve is just sum up all the different individual demand curves. If there are more individuals, then the market demand curve will shift to the right. If there are less individuals, the market demand curve will shift to the left, all right? More individuals means more market, all right? Other things that can change it are aging, immigration, war. These all affect the number of buyers in a particular market, all right? So the last slide here I have, and I've put up a PDF of this on Canvas that you could print out, are the different factors that shift the demand curve, all right? So these are things that shift it to the left, meaning a decrease in demand, all right? And you can look through these on the PDF that I print out, that you can print out. And these are a list of some examples of things that will increase demand or shift demand to the right. And again, the thing to notice is none of these things are price of the good itself, all right? Price of the good itself changing moves you along a demand curve, all right? So, all right, there you go. Oh, I have a clip to leave you with. This is a clip from the Hudsucker Proxy. It's a movie. It's about a guy who invents this. You know what that is, right? And it's for kids. Check out the clip.